Okay.
Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the World IA Cafe Speaker Series. Thank you for joining in today. As like the previous webinars, I'm sure this would be excellent as well. My name is Rupa Mishra. I'm an associate teaching professor in the MBS program at Rutgers University. I manage and teach in the user experience design as well as in the product design concentrations in the MBS program. I'm also an active member of World Eye Association. The topic for today's webinar is Pink, Evolving Symbolism Across Different Cultures and Eras. Sounds fascinating, and I can wait to hear what the speaker has to say. The speaker for this interactive event is Evgeni Minchev. Welcome, Evgeni. We have been planning this for
Hi.
quite some time, and I'm glad it's happening. He's an information architect and design leader with over 10 years of experience. He explores the intersection of color, culture, and intent. He has spoken at various events, currently focused on AI in EdTech, which is one of my interests as well. He seeks to enhance learning through design. Outside of work, he's an avid fly dresser and angler. Maybe next time our topic will be on artificial flies and you'll be able to show us what you have been working on. That'd be interesting.
Oh God. Please no.
So, I think Nihar has shared his LinkedIn profile link, which is great. So in this talk, Evgeni is going to explore the evolving symbolism of the color pink across different cultures and time periods using historical and contemporary examples to trace its shifting meanings. And enjoy the webinar today. Now over to you, Evgeni.
Hi. That was pretty elaborate on who I am and what I do and why I do it. The only thing I'm gonna say and would repeat for some of you because I already mentioned that on this meeting, but I literally free fall into rabbit holes and in all sorts of domains and interests. So it usually happens to me that I find something interesting and I start to dig and look around, and then it ends. Nobody knows where and how and when. And this particular talk is a really good illustration of this, and how a lot of things in my life happen. So hopefully that's going to be interesting to you. It's a little bit chaotic and untypical. So bear with me, and it's going to take some time to get to the point. But hopefully, when I get there, it would make some sense, and most of all, it would provoke a good discussion. I'm happy for anyone to oppose any of what I'm saying, although it's mostly factual. Um, and I'm happy to hear your perspective, questions, comments, anything that's on your mind. Um, so I also see that there's an encouragement from Nihar to share what got me interested in ontology, and I think that was my professor in the university, who might be known to some of you. His name is Andrea Resmini, and we grew very close to each other, and he literally ignited the spark to me to be curious about everything surrounding me and the whole world in general. And he literally taught me that you can be whatever you want. So just do it. But let's go back to the topic. So pink. To those of you who are close to the academic world, I ask for apology into framing my references for being inconsistent. So that's a formal apology. I know that's important to all of you, and I've done that as well. But for this particular purpose, I was not very careful or meticulous. So please don't judge me for that. So pink. Let's start. Small disclaimer. And before that, you all see my, I'm sharing my screen, right? And you see text on white highlight, right?
Yep.
Good. So this talk might include some bad words, not that many actually, some inappropriate or ugly illustrations, Most of them would be low quality because people on the web and mostly the technical people have learned how to protect imagery quite well. Even though I do attribute everything to all the people and their rights and the different licenses, but getting images from online is super hard. And you would also need to go through my lame dad jokes and puns that might be here and there. Some of them are I'm not going to mention. So if you notice them, enjoy them. If you do, if you don't, the disclaimer is actually for that. So we're starting. This is my kid. I'm not going to say what gender it is. And I would really try hard not to because I fail most times when I give this talk. But it all started with them. That's super hard to escape from using the right pronoun. Um, and the reason was that when we were going outside as a family, a lot of bystanders and people on the street would stop and make a compliment, and that would really make my partner frustrated because it was the wrong gender identification. One thing it's worth to mention is that my mother-in-law is an architect who owns a business that designs kids' clothes, ages 1 to 6. So her inheriting that aesthetic from the architecture world and everything being super simplistic, clean, and using colors that are not that bright and the typical blue, pink, green, all the very very stereotypical kids' colors made this even a harder task for everyone to be able to guess the right gender of my kid. So later on, you're going to find out what it is. Please put an image in your head and think, okay, it looks to me that it's a he or she, and maybe we'll find out if you're right or not, and what made you think this way. Right. So here we go. Housekeeping and etymology of color. Being an information architect, to me, the easiest thing to do is to go down the rabbit hole by just looking the meaning behind words. And etymology helps a lot, at least for me, to start, to have a clean sheet of paper and then start making scribbles on top of it and just pick it up from somewhere. And I think it's my reinforcement, confirmation bias part that is making me happy to have that aha moment and see, oh, I thought this word meant exactly this, and this is the origin of this word. So if you type color in an etymology dictionary, you're going to see that the earliest usage of the word color was for the purpose of describing skin color in the early 13th century. And then looking into Old French, obviously, because English because of the English language, that is reinforcing the same concept. And then you go to Latin and see what color means. And then we go back to the color of the skin. And mostly because people, I guess, needed to differentiate and also have all those class differences and be able to segment races and so on and so forth. You would see one small caveat here that I need to put is that you would see that this talk is going to be described the journey that I went through when I wanted to learn more about the color pink and why I ended up actually thinking about the color pink. So for some time, with this, for the first good half, it's not going to make that much sense, but it's going to tie down later, just like a Tarantino movie. Old English words for color were hue and blue, which is interesting because there's a lot of connection here to natural dyes and how people use colors and what they use them for. But hue is a good one to know because hue is a very modern word, which is actually not that modern, but we use it as designers. And when we do design work, especially in the fields that are concerned with visual design and having anything graphical to be put and concerned with choice of color. Later on, in the etymology dictionary, I pretty much went dead end because it's only this much. And color seems to be a very boring word. There's not much more that you can get from that. So I guess I was satisfied with what is there and went on. So color comes from the dark side of the moon, and which means that there is some invisible to the visible. So I thought, okay, so why do we have color? Because we perceive color, and then I started thinking of how do we perceive color, and that's how I ended reading a super hard piece to read, especially for someone who's not a native speaker. That Bakarian lecture on the theory theory of light and colors from the 1800s, and it's actually super nice read if you can get the language working, because it's literally the notes of the lecturer, Mr. Young, who put them down and then he read them in front of the audience of the university. So what he does there is that in all of those many pages, I think there are about 30 pages, 36 pages to be exact, he gets to the hypothesis that we are perceiving light because there's a sense of vibration that goes through our brains when we look at items that are reflecting light. And he was not really far from the truth. The exact quote is that perception of color derives from the stimulation of photoreceptor cells, in particular cone cells in the human eye and other vertebrate eyes, by that electromagnetic radiation. I lost that reference and I was never able to find it. By the way, the modern AI search enhancements are literally crippling search engines to help you find text through quotes. So continuing to do the housekeeping work and to set the base level for how do we work with color is that light goes through your eyes and then proceeds throughout almost your whole brain and gets back to the visual cortex, which tells you, hey, I know that the signal that I'm receiving through the optic nerve is pink. So to put it super simple, and I really need that to add later on metaphors, light is reflected through an object and then perceived by the human eye. And as soon as it enters the eye to the pupil, which is pretty much a control organ, and the retina for how much light, for how much is exposing the back of your eye sphere. And then there's a tissue which contains those rods and cones who are basically light sensitive to different light frequencies. And then that is allowing your nerve to say, okay, this many cones register this amount of input. So therefore we interpret this as color. Of course, as humans and have different tissue structure, that's how we get people have different vision deficiencies, as we call them, or all the colorblind variations and so on and so forth. And that's pretty much it. That's how the human is perceiving color. Going through this made me really think that the eye is crucial for us describing color. So if you notice on the quote beforehand, it says all the vertebrate eyes, which implies that there are some creatures who don't see like that. And that's super fascinating to me up to this day as well, because that means that there's other creatures that live among us who perceive the world and see more or differently than we do, which means that they basically live in a different color. For those of you who are interested in subjects like phenomenology, that's a mind-blowing statement, right? Because it means that we live the same world, but we're in the same environment, but we perceive and have a different experience. So the sense of being is completely different. And that's another rabbit hole. So if we continue with the really technical stuff around here, which I think I'm only fascinated because I owe it to my ancestors of engineers, and I have like 4 generations down the line of engineers and technical people. So, and I'm the first one who's not, but I think it's ingrained in my personality to look for the technical part, at least to be able to explain, okay, so this works this way, and then go to the abstract and more vague terms. But if that's the visual spectrum as we know it, as we define it in physics, you can see that the visible spectrum, which is noted here, is not that much. It is super condensed and packed with so much, but there's so much more outside, which means that there might be things who are emitting, reflecting in a specific, in the part of the spectrum which is basically invisible for us. So, yeah. Well, the beauty of that is that humans were able to develop technologies which allow us to see outside of that spectrum, right? And another rabbit hole. So, and then there's more. Color rendering as defined by International Commission on Illumination. And I was so excited when I learned that something like this exists. I mean, if you look at it, it's called an International Commission on Illumination. And actually, that's super important people that were later merged in the International Electronic Commission, I think it was called, who were studying that the effect of illumination of a color appearance of an object by conscious or subconscious comparisons with their color appearance under reference or standard illuminant. I butchered this by reading it, but that pretty much means that the objects that we perceive through our eyes depend on what is the light emitter. And this is how my obsession with flashlights started. For those who don't know me, I have 150 million hobbies. One of them is collecting flashlights. It's mostly because of this single slide here. So there's a bunch of people who look like Gandalf. They're super cool. Who put a lot of effort into studying how different light sources are affecting colors of the objects that reflect that light. And then are we seeing the actual thing or not? It's called CRI, or color rendering index, and it's a way to measure how well how close to the standard light source, which is the sun. There's no other light source that's standard. We try to produce LEDs that mimic the sun, but the sun is the sun. They do measure that difference, and you can see in that example that two different light sources. One is I think it's a iridescent light bulb, and the other one is an LED. Through that really, really tiny crack in the piece of cardboard, have different wavelengths of the light that goes through. So this is going to affect how the banana is portrayed. And I know it sounds super technical and also boring to a huge extent, but think about it this way. Think that you're 2,000 years back in time, and you're going out to pick up some mushrooms at night with a super fancy flashlight that you bought from Amazon. And you need to eat that mushroom because that's the era of gathering. So if that flashlight is rendering the color poorly, it's highly likely that you would eat that mushroom only once because you won't have a second chance. So from that standpoint, that's super important. And things like that exist. So if you can resist, don't go into it when you buy your next headlamp for your mountain adventure and so on, because it's an endless thing. And there's no 100% standard light source. Anyways, so going down the rabbit hole, this creature is called a peacock mantis shrimp, and it's one of the most fascinating creatures on the planet when it comes to vision and color vision. And that's mostly because its range of perception of color is spectacular. It has nothing even close to what we perceive as humans. You can see on that illustration that it sees so much more, and it literally sees things that we never see. There's a super interesting French guy, and I didn't want to include that because otherwise a presentation would have been endless. But there's a super interesting French guy that you might Google and you want to see. He emulated how the mantis shrimp actually sees and what they see. And there's a different topic there on contrast, because they see more and more things in the ocean, but they have poorer contrast than we do. And that could be explained, but right, we need to talk about pink. So we know how we perceive color. We know what are the limitations. We pretty much went off topic, so I had to go back. I thought about, okay, if there's pink and there's red and there's blue, it means that there's some sort of organization. So the humans dye things from a long time for different reasons, and color plays a huge role into communication and information communication and so on. So in order for us to communicate things, we usually organize them. Color spaces are much more mathematics than everything else. And I spent so much time studying those because I just was fascinated by how we approached those, and how many people spend their lives into organizing and creating those spaces. that I pretty much went through all of this list. Now, when I was doing this slide, it was long before ChatGPT, and I was devastated yesterday when I was preparing my slides that I could have done this for probably 1 minute just asking ChatGPT to create an extensive list of color spaces. But those are great. And everybody in print that I communicate with hates me because I ask for things that they've never heard of, and I open too many conversations that should not be open. So we know how color is organized now, right? And here comes the first problem that I've collided with. When you talk to people in design fields, they usually have a very strong opinion on what specific colors are used for. And when there's ongoing branding and marketing conversations or anything related to choosing colors for interfaces or anything else that is communicating any sort of information, they would come to you and say, hey, we need to use blue because blue is the color of corporate, and this is a corporate platform, and it needs to be blue because blue is the color it needs to be. Why is it blue? I'm going to show you in a moment why. But there's that thing called symbolism, and it's usually super well hidden into articles called color theory, or even into some textbook materials that I've encountered. And it's a super objective meaning humans attach to various colors. And as we all know, being information architects, the tomato being a fruit or a vegetable, it's probably the best question ever, right? Because the correct answer is none. And fruit and vegetable is a non-existing term, but we won't be able to exist with it. So those those subjective meanings that humans attach to colors should not be disregarded that easily as I would have thought originally when I was looking into this topic. Because that meaning is basically the essence of language. And if we had language without meaning, we wouldn't have had language. And the philosophical argument is that without language, we wouldn't have existed because there's no meaning and there's no communication and no information exchange and so on. I think it was called Emilio Granchi, the Italian who posed this question. So looking further into those meetings, you find places like this thing is called Color Theory for Designers, Part 1, The Meaning of Color by Cameron Chapman. That article has a lot of positive parts, some very well thought. And it's also, the way I found this was within the materials for preparing a person to become an intermediate designer in an internal resource folder. And it has this part where in brief it says that colors like blue, for example, communicate calm, responsible, and sadness. And you can see the others, like black is mystery, elegance, and evil. So black is evil. According to this, most of my slides are evil and stuff like that. And that really bothers me. And here we start really looking into pink because obviously pink has meaning. And we get to that in a moment. But this is really what bothered me initially. Yeah, let's move on. So here, at some point, I said, that's enough, right? Let's go into something else because I just lost interest into exploring color from that really, really technical perspective. So when you say pink, that's wet pink. Depending on how well your monitors are calibrated, we see different things, which even makes it even more difficult to communicate. But wet pink is what everyone who's concerned with visual items should think about first, because we communicate through digital devices and there's standardization in the world wide web standards, and wet pink is what pink should be. Then there's Pantone pink, another color space. There's millennial pink. It's a little bit pale, but most millennials like me are pale for obvious reasons. And there's China pink. Interestingly enough, those that I'm going to show you in the next few slides that are named after a geographical location, for some reason, I personally think that if I had to connect them into a quiz-like game, I would most likely be very good. because it sort of speaks to me like those countries and their character and what the concept in my head about those countries. And there's New York pink, right? Not very pink, but still, it is pink. All of those shades that I'm going to show you are, so to speak, formalized and standardized. So they do exist. Then there's the Mountbatten pink, or also called Plymouth pink, which is actually a military color used in camouflage. So pink is not that feminine anymore, right? And then there's Mexican pink. I could totally imagine a skull painted in this one on the, I think it was called Day of the Muertes. No, yeah. And then there's French pink, uh, and then there's Persian pink. And you see, the more we progress, the more interesting it will get. Hopefully, there's also Shocking Pink by Elsa, who was a designer designing a very specific perfume packaging, and her idea was to reinforce the aromas and of that perfume through color. Uh, Perfumes are another rabbit hole. And then there's Pink Lace, which is obviously suggestive of the color of some woman's lingerie. And then there's Cherry Blossom Pink from the sakura trees in Japan, who's literally inspired by the blossoms. And then there's Spanish Pink, and there's all sorts of pinks, right? This one I made with ChatGPT because otherwise it would have been a pain. And it's not an extensive list. You can get millions of those probably because going back to the color spaces, it's a mathematical problem to create shades of pink and then give them names. There's millions of pinks that could exist. But it really goes back to the question, why was my kid mistaken so much within its gender and how is that related to color? So to get to that point, we're going to go through a more historical overlook and different examples of how pink was used. And by no means this is an extensive or elaborate matter here because it's just impossible. Turns out pink is a super popular color for so many things. Nowadays, and we're going to start from now and go back in time, pink's used for things that need to scream a lot, like this particular one, or the pink ribbon, which is literally a cry for help, right? When we show solidarity in different healthcare related causes like breast cancer awareness, and it's been used for other occasions as well. There's also those bracelets, and I've seen that so many of those, and pink is always there. Some of them are more colorful, they get other beads as well, but if you look at it closely, and unfortunately, I'm sure most of you have seen those, but all of them have pink beads. And this is not gender related by any means, right? There is a different message, and that makes me think on why would people make conscious choices using pink in the scenarios that I showed above, when it's not only about femininity, but femininity would be a prevailing topic into most of the examples following. At some point, we get to another pink, right? It's called hot pink. Hot pink is super hot as a topic, mostly. It has so much history, and I think hot pink is basically when my fascination with pink started because I became obsessive of finding out everything I could about pink itself and learn why it is this way it is and why is it so different than other colors, although other colors have a lot of history as well. So that's the pink triangle. And the pink triangle has been a symbol for various LGBTQIA plus identities for a long, long time. It has a very long history. And it comes from somewhere where, if you're not familiar with the story, it might surprise you. But this is the symbol. And it is having that hot pink hue put on it for a reason. And then there's Hillary Clinton pink. And her pink is interesting because it's one of the first examples, or more closest to our time examples, where it shows her intent. And she literally said that buying into the idea that for a woman to wield power in what was historically a man's world, she had to pretty much dress like a man but brighter. So pink is an instrument to send a message and say, "Hey, I'm here and I'm brighter than you, and this is what I'm doing." But it is making that distinguishing that you're a man and I'm a woman and I'm brighter and I'm pink. And here's a very early photo from Beijing, 1995, in what some might call the beginning of her career, wearing that pink suit. She wore different kinds of pink, so there's no specific pink that's Hillary Clinton, but I had to be consistent with naming, right? And then there's Barbie pink. Barbie pink is so bright. Barbie is a great story, and there's a lot to learn from the Barbie story, and the quote here that says that unlike play with a baby doll, in which a little girl is pretty much limited to assuming the role of a mummy, Barbie has always represented the fact that a woman has choices. And I think that's fascinating because um, Barbie was actually the introduction to um, kids and girls that, hey, today's age, you can be whatever you want. You can be a doctor, you can be a lawyer. So there's that political, very sensitive message here that your place in the world is equal. And pink is again targeted to say uh, to girls exclusively because Barbie has never considered boys the same way. Obviously, Barbiecore uh, spun off from the Barbie culture, and that's pretty much excessively dressing in pink. There's nothing wrong with that. Just interesting how people take things and take it to a completely next level. Mostly like my talk here. Um, Andy Warhol, 1967. Pink is Marilyn Monroe. He's literally saying, yeah, she's pink and bright, and there's that long hair, but everything else is pink. So there's a lot of attachment to the personality of a woman and pink. And then there's punk, pink. One of the punk culture uses and utilizes pink a lot, but really the earliest manifestation of that I was able to find is that Pink Flag album of the band called Wire, and it's a very special album because it was one of the very early days punk rock culture establishment, and Pink just stuck, and punk affiliate people have always been using Pink. And then there is the Baker Miller Pink, also known as the Schaus Pink. This one is different because it comes from a very interesting study uh, of Alexander Schaus, who had the hypothesis that if you paint a room in pink, that will have a calming effect on the people who inhabit the room. So he needed a way to test that, and what they did is that they painted the room colors in the cells in prisons in pink. And they did that a lot, and there's a lot of those papers actually an awesome read if you're interested. And they did that a lot, and according to the statistical information that went out in those papers, it was actually successful, and a huge portion of those um, inmates were able to decrease aggression and negative behaviors in the tranquilizing pink cells that they occupied. Now, this is under question, of course, because there's so many variables that need to be traced and limitations of those studies. But nevertheless, this didn't prevent one person to take that piece of work, learn it in the army, and then go and become an American football coach in the state of Iowa. And he painted the guest room, the guest lockers, and the restrooms in pink, in exactly the same shade as the Schaus pink. And they claimed that he basically won the next many seasons, all the guest games because of that pink, because it demoralized the players that were guests and so on and so forth. It's a long story. Feel free to go and explore and read. He was also very criticized for the approach, and there was a lot of homophobic kind of conversation around this, and that it was offensive and so on. But it's a very interesting usage of pink because it's a significant detachment from the fact that pink is for girls, Barbie dolls, and so on and so forth. Let's utilize it in a completely different way. That's also one of those meanings that is persistent within the meaning of the color pink, which has that soothing and calming effect. Although a huge portion of the studies related to Baker Miller pink and the Schaus pink suggest also that in rare cases, and rare means like a minority of cases, so it's not that insignificant, is amplifying the effects of aggression and discomfort to people who are exposed to excessive amounts of pink environment. So, yeah, a lot like science works. The majority usually wins the thing, and edge cases are not that well explored. Funny thing, well, it's not funny, but um, I have one quote from an article describing the lockers here that homophobic and sexist slurs are deeply ingrained within locker room culture. And in Fry's day, which is the coach, it was par for the course for coaches to motivate players by calling them homo, girl, and in Fry's own words, sissy. So it's a contradiction to what he was aiming to do because, and I think it's a misinterpretation of his act because they thought that he's basically offending the guest room, the guest players, and he actually wanted to do something else. Moving further and basically going back in time, we go to a movie called Think Pink. And that's a very famous quote from a song that was performed by Kay Thompson. There's an awesome YouTube video of that. And she's singing Banish the Black and Burn the Blue. And what is she's doing in that song is basically she's saying that from now on, girls, you think pink. So forget every other color and think pink. So we go back in time and there's that prevailing, I would call it a sale point that pink is for girls and it needs to be utilized. And it was literally sold to people to understand that, hey, pink is a girlish and feminine color. Going down the rabbit hole, I stumbled into this book, which was super hard to read and I never finished because it was just a topic that's super different. But what I found in it is this very blurry screenshot that I made because it's only available on Google Books or something. And I don't remember what year it was, but it's super old. But it has this quote, and I'll try to read it well so you don't get tortured by me. But while many still see gender as the expression of natural differences, the women's movement of the 1970s and the 1980s launched a powerful alternative perspective. Notions of femininity and masculinity, the gender divisions one sees on school playgrounds, the idea of gender itself, all are social constructs. Parents dress infant girls in pink and boys in blue, give them gender differentiated names and toys, and expect them to act differently. Peer groups also perpetuate gender type play and interaction. In short, if boys and girls are different, they're not born but made that way. So that made me think that I'm probably on the right track to find out why pink is so attached to women and why it is being so capsulated in those constructs. So I kept on. And then I learned about the First Lady Pink. Which First Lady, you would ask? Anyone has a guess? It's not the right setup to ask that question, but it's the First Lady of Eisenhower, who famously loved the shade and redecorated the White House in it, setting off a design trend in the 1950s. So this lady, she were not having the burden of being explained that because that's before everything I showed you, going back to in a retrospect. She did not have the burden that pink is for girls, and the thing is that she just loved pink, and she moved 28 times throughout the career of her husband, and changed so many homes that she was really focused on how to make them comfortable and feel like their own. So what she did is that she had a huge set of different samples of fabrics, paints, and furniture to move with her, that everywhere they moved, she would bring that suitcase and tell, hey, this is what I want to make, and show them the samples and the colors and everything else. So she literally said that Ike runs the country, I turn the pork chops. And she loved pink. That was her thing. That's her portrait. So what she did is that she decorated the rooms, and her being pink being her favorite color, she put pink everywhere she could, including her bathroom. Her and her husband had separate bathrooms, and green was super trending back then with tan and I think a very specific shade of beige. But you can see on the right how her bathroom looked like, and it's pretty much pink. By the way, that's picking up trends, and I literally saw in Italy an almost exact copy of one of her bathrooms in a public place. That was super interesting to me, and I was so excited to see it and told all of my friends who you would imagine didn't want to hear anything. Going back in time, we get back to the pink triangle, right? I showed you the same thing a moment ago. Those who paid attention might have noticed that it was rotated in a different way. And this pink triangle is different because that's the origin of the one that the LGBTQI plus community is probably using nowadays. This had a completely different reason. And if you're interested, it's probably the best described in this book. It's called The Men with the Pink Triangle. And those who are reading the references underneath already know what I'm talking about. And it was part of a color coding system during the Nazi Germany times. And you see that it was not only pink, there was red and black and yellow and different types of ones, but the pink one was there to label all the homosexual prisoners in the camps. Why did they choose pink? I never found out, but it was exactly the same hot pink shade that is currently utilized for so many other things. And the community nowadays uses the same triangle, I guess, just to reclaim and put a much more positive note on the symbol and not let it be what it was used for. And there we go to baby pink. And here things get different because in the 1927, there's some evidence found that girls would equally wear both blue and pink. And it's also very interesting to observe that during the 1920s and the Victorian era, social convention dictated that boys wear dresses until about age 6 or 7, when they transitioned to trousers as part of a coming of an age tradition known as breeching. By the early 1920s, however, most children in the Western countries started dressing along gender lines, with boys in pants and girls in dresses. We were able to trace that in the disorders book that I showed you. And as much as this talk is not related to gender identification problems and issues, and I'm definitely staying away from that topic for sure, but it feels like there's so many moving factors that might have contributed or allowed this conversation to happen. And this is an exact copy of the trim that what is a pink boy suit designed before 1936. So it is fascinating that this would be typically a boy thing, right? So if you dress a kid into that back then, and you go out for a walk just like I did with my kid, most likely everyone would think that's a boy. Nowadays, nobody's gonna think that's a boy. It's also interesting that the cleavage-like trim is probably showing a function, a functional thing of clothing, but I haven't been in that rabbit hole yet. Maybe next time. So around this time, another gender-related fashion trend gained traction in the US and the United Kingdom, which is the association between boys and the color blue and girls and the color pink. So based on everything that I was able to dig out and learn and chase, something happened around the 1920s. And that's those events, because there's enough historic evidence, and here I stay away from adding those because I think they're a little bit subjective. But in 1918 is the earliest evidence I found that girls were not wearing pink. So quoting the article, and the article actually has the good resources, says that girls should always wear blue because it is delicate and dainty color. And pink did not exist before the 1918, the same way it does now. And that's the the literature review of the color pink for me. And at this point, you might be a little bit lost because there's not so much connection except listing different shades of pink and what they were used for. And you being in the US now know how European cinema feels like. The analogy would be if you've watched that French movie called The Men Who Fall from the Third Floor, I think was the name of the movie, is a 3.5 hour movie about a person who goes in the villa in the Alps. He goes to the third floor and he falls from the window and he dies. And then for the rest of the movie, they investigate why that happened. And at the end, it turned out that he just slipped and fell. And that's it for 3.5 hours. So my talk is a lot like this. Unless if you go back to the photo, this is my kid. So she's a girl, obviously. She's definitely rocking that Barbiecore thing because you can see that everything from the bike through the skirt and the jacket, and her helmet is pink. And she chose them on her own. I did by no means influence her choices. I've also tried super hard to show her that um, everyone can wear pink, including myself, being a boy and her father. But the point I want to make, parts of this slide don't load. Really? That's the most important slide. Do you actually see anything? Show anyway. No. No?
No, there's a
Right.
question mark.
Yeah. Probably Google Drive does something. On this slide, it says intent. Because color and everything that we use like color is meaningless without intent. And you saw that at certain moments in history, especially with the color pink, intent shaped the meaning of that color. So no list or article could describe a color and attach any subjective meanings to it that are universally true. And many people in history, obviously, like the Schaus pink and the Nazi German designers, who unfortunately were so brilliant in what they did in terms of their design work and architecting what they did, literally reshaped meaning. So what I'm trying to say is that color does not have meaning on its own. It's the intent that brings meaning and that we channel through what we do with color. And if you know which mustache this one is, that's not much of a different case because intent ruined this mustache for generations ahead, right? Nobody would ever have the same name or the same mustache for obviously because of the intent behind the vision, the vision that this guy portrayed. And that applies to the usage of the color pink as well. Thank you.
This has been a wonderful, wonderful talk, and thank you, everyone, and especially Evgeni, for giving this wonderful talk. And we have another talk scheduled for next week. Hopefully, all of you will join next week. Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.